Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Standing Committee on City Finance and Services meeting for November 22nd, 2022, reconvening from November 16th, 2022. This committee meeting is being convened by electronic means as authorized under Part 14 of the Procedure Bylaw. As such, committee members may participate in person or by electronic means. Committee members participating by electronic means are reminded that in accordance with Section 14.13 of the Procedure Bylaw, video must be enabled in order to confirm quorum. Any council member whose video is disabled will be marked absent for that portion of the meeting. Members are also asked to please advise the clerk if they need to leave the meeting. If a committee member loses connection during the voting process, staff will get you back online quickly while we suspend the voting process. The staff contact information has been circulated to you. Video of committee meetings or members speaking and vote results will be projected on the live stream when available. And any comments on agenda items can be sent to council using the web form on the city's website. The link to that form will be tweeted out on Van's City Clerk. I also want to note the City of Vancouver's long-standing commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion, including the utmost respect for all genders. I remind council that when addressing speakers and staff, we will avoid using gendered honorifics and will instead refer to the person by first and last name, role, or title. We also acknowledge that we are on the unceded homelands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. We thank them for having cared for this land and look forward to working with them in partnership as we continue to build this great city together. I also would like to take a moment to recognize the immense contributions of the City of Vancouver staff who work hard every day to help make our city an incredible place to live, work, and play. Clerk, may we have the roll call, please?
Yes. Mayor Sim is on a leave of absence for civic business. Councillor Carr. Councillor Kirby-Young. Councillor Dominato. Councillor Bly is on leave of absence. Councillor Boyle. Councillor Fry. Councillor Montague. Councillor Clausen. Councillor Meisner is in the chair. Councillor Jo. The meeting has quorum. Chair Meisner.
Thank you. At the November 16th, 2022 meeting, the committee completed items 1 to 10, concluded hearing speakers for items 11 and 12, and referred debate and decision to today's meeting. If the business is not concluded by 5 p.m. today, we will take a dinner break at that time and reconvene at 6 p.m. to continue dealing with the remainder of the agenda. Should the business not be completed this evening, this meeting will reconvene tomorrow at 3 p.m. Finally, I would like to remind council members that if amendments are brought forward, they must be submitted to the city clerk in final written form before the council member introduces them. Please ensure the clerk has received any potential amendments by using the council meeting amendments DL. The third referred motion is item 11, enabling the requisitioning and hiring of 100 new police officers and 100 mental health nurses. Members motion B.5, which was moved and introduced by Councillor Dominato and seconded by Councillor Montague. As speakers were heard for this item on November 16th, we will now move directly to discussion. Council, is there any discussion? And I see a few council members in the queue, so we will start with Councillor Dominato. You have the floor. Sorry. There you go. Apologies.
Yeah. Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Council. I've circulated an amendment. It's a revised from last week, and I just actually corrected a typo, so my apologies. But it addresses some changes that I think really reflect the paradigm shift that we saw with Premier Eby's announcement around the Safer Communities efforts, and I think a number of us attended on Sunday. And so what you'll see reflected in there are a couple of amendments.
Oh, great.
That's all right. I'll try to speak to each one of them. So the first amendment you'll see within clauses B and C is a shift in the funding. We had initially identified an initial block of funding to support the hiring of police officers and mental health nurses. What we're affirming as of the announcement and further conversations is a full block of funding for the 2023 operating budget of $8 million for both policing and mental health nurses, inclusive of any provincial or federal government funding that may be available. So that's the first amendment. The second amendment is with respect to a commitment that we laid out in the ABC Vancouver platform, which was a commitment to explore the options of bringing forward and supporting. My mic again.
Sorry, we're just trying to figure something out here. Apologies. Councillor Dominato, please continue.
No, thank you. Second commitment, a commitment that was in the ABC Vancouver platform around supporting and exploring the option of having the Canadian Mental Health Association's peer-assisted care teams operating in Vancouver, which these are civilian-led initiatives with a range of mental health professionals. They have 3 pilots currently underway in the Lower Mainland, and it's complementary to existing policing and other health programs. And so that amendment proposes that we explore that option of having a team in Vancouver or teams in Vancouver, and that we specifically make a request to the province to be considered one of the 12 teams that they announced on the weekend. And the third amendment is to thank Premier Eby for his leadership on taking steps with the Safer Communities Action Plan, which addresses a range of issues that we've been hearing throughout Vancouver over the last, not just the last number of months, but the last number of years around community safety. And so that is to thank him for that, as well as to lend our support and endorsement of the 10 additional Indigenous Justice Centres that were also announced on Sunday. And so with those are the amendments I'm moving this afternoon.
Thank you, Councillor Dominato, and apologies for the technical issues there. We're now going to move to the amendment queue, so please add yourself to the queue if you would like to speak. Thank you. First person in the amendment queue is Councillor Fry. Councillor Fry, you have the floor.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Concerned with the sort of ad hoc nature of how these numbers keep changing. Obviously, we heard that there was the original impression that the province was paying $3 million towards mental health, and now we're seeing this change. And I'm seeing the police budget that was just released for 2023 operating budget. The Vancouver Police are suggesting these new hires will cost $15.7 million, inclusive of 20 civilian. But $15.7 million is quite a big difference from $8 million, and I'm also noting that, in fact, the police are seeking a $38.5 million budget increase for 2023, and I really feel that this is poorly formed and really is more deserving of there's certainly some great stuff talking about the mental health and some of the support for the Safer Communities Action Plan, but the specific allocation of funding, I am really struggling with where the numbers are coming from, how this has been vetted. We've seen the numbers change a number of times. And frankly, I know that this is going to go ahead because of the ABC majority, but I think it's reckless in the fact that the numbers have been challenged in the media and refuted as not accurate. And then we've seen a change in the numbers, and they're still not accurate relative to what the police are predicting. So I will be asking for this to be severed as far as the amendments.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Fry. Councillor Boyle.
Thanks, Chair. I share those concerns, but I'm hoping to ask a couple questions of the mover of the amendment through you as Chair, if you'll allow it. And the first is that I am interested to know where the original numbers of 4.5 and 1.5 came from and where these 8 million come from. I'll leave that as my first question.
Oh, apologies. Yeah, 1 sec here. There you go.
Yes, thanks for the question. My understanding is that these were estimates based on conversations with VPD and VCH around the costing for FTEs for mental health nurses and police officers. And as was noted, there is now a public document that VPD board has released around costing for the budget. And so that has helped inform our information. And my understanding is that with what's proposed, the $8 million allocated for 2023, that will enable the hiring of 100 officers in 2023.
I have a follow-up question, Chair, which is in that report, which of course is just out this afternoon from the police board. As Councillor Fry stated, their estimate is 15 million to hire 100 new police officers. And so again, I'm just really trying to understand the numbers before us, why the discrepancy between that 15 million and this 8 and that 15 million and the earlier 4.5.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question, Councillor Boyle. So my understanding again is that with this full block of $8 million funding for 2023, that VPD can hire those 100 officers, and that the 15.7 million is an annualized cost.
Okay, so do you, just again as a follow-up through you, Chair, if you'll allow it, a fully funded estimate for this 100 police officers and 100 nurses plan once it's up to date? We just keep seeing moving numbers, and so I'm interested in what the full commitment that council is making here, whether it's over a year or 2 years, the cost of this.
Yeah, so as noted, this is for 1 year, 2023. Obviously, it'll take a bit of time for VPD to ramp up and recruit and hire those officers, but that with that sum, they will be able to have 100 officers in place in 2023. And then the 15.7 million is an annualized cost on an ongoing basis.
Okay, I will leave my questions there and just say I too share a concern that we're making such significant funding decisions in what feels like on the fly. Maybe some councillors have been privy to conversations about these numbers, but many of us are finding out about them in an amendment circulated within the last hour or on social media. I don't think that that's a good way to be making these decisions, and even more so, these are important conversations about how best and how most effectively we're meeting the needs of the mental health crisis that we're seeing across the city. And I think we should be doing that work in a more informed way, looking at all of the options on the table and allocating funding based on effectiveness, based on programs. So again, I know this will go through, but I have some serious concerns about how the process has happened so far. As one of the first motions to this council, it feels like we have room for improvement in our governance here.
Thank you, Councillor Boyle. Councillor Kirby-Young.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I would like to speak in support of the amendment, and I'm really happy that we have a shared commitment to good governance, because I think that's something that we have all espoused. I think it's really important to recognize that we have had very bold action, not just initially from this council, but also from the province. And we have a developing situation, happily, where we are actually seeing council and the province both step up to take significant action to address these significant issues that are happening in our city. And that means that we are adapting to an announcement that happened on Sunday morning on a weekend, because new Premier Eby hit the ground running out of the gate. We heard comments previously from Premier Horgan that Vancouver was on the right track. We've had Eby endorse the direction of pairing mental health resources with police officers, as well as the importance of peer-assisted crisis teams. And clearly we have a paradigm now that is starting to align, where we're seeing all levels of government working together. And I think that this process has been responsive to that. I would add my comments with respect to the funding envelope, that I understand that, and again, you've got different bodies that are working through their respective governance processes, which need to be respected, but the 15.7 million in the VPD, based on my quick math, is an annualized amount. And I think that doing our due diligence and good governance, looking at it and recognizing that there's going to be a ramp-up process, that this is a pathway to the bringing on and hiring of new police officers to ensure that that commitment of 100 is delivered by the end of the year, and that you will see 100 new police officers on the books, on the ground, ready to tackle these issues that will come on stream naturally, progressively throughout the year based on recruiting, hiring, training, all of those good things. I'm also really happy to see the inclusion, and thanks to Councillor Dominato for that, of the PACT request for the peer-assisted crisis team. I think originally you would have seen that come forward as a separate motion. But again, kind of responding to the emergent opportunities and the think, spectacular alignment. I don't think there's another word for it that we are seeing with the province. It only makes sense to convey and that we see this as a very integrated, holistic framework. And we're responding to that door that has been opened and walking through it with open arms, that we are looking to tackle the problems with proven programs like AOT, the assertive outreach team, that have outcomes, but we're also looking to be open to the opportunities where we can look for intervention where we can de-escalate and we can bring in and we can try new things like the PAC team. And I think that this amendment really thoughtfully does that. I also think that it conveys Council's gratitude to the province, quite frankly, for stepping up and making this the first of the Premier's 3 announcements. And I think that we can spend our time debating the fact that we are being responsive to the emerging situation, or we can actually go back to the 10,000 foot level and look at the fact that there is a huge cost to not doing this. And I think about instances like on the weekend, I think on Commercial Drive, people were out having brunch at 11 o'clock and one of the staff members had a gun held up to them. Some of the brunchers were shaken down with respects to taking their wallets. We have had many instances, such as in Chinatown, with the Chinese senior who, for the second time, was walking to get his morning bao at the bakery and was attacked and assaulted. And we've seen a lot of instances of people with mental health who are falling through the gaps, and we have not been able to meet. We left, I should say, police officers on the table when council shortchanged the VPD budget last time, and we could have actually scaled up the CAR 87, 88, and we could have done or the AOT and had some positive outreach, because we know that that helps keep people in housing. We know that helps keep people from devolving that have significant needs. And so I would say to all of council, what is the cost of not doing this? So I really hope we don't get into a debate over, how much funding is going the first quarter versus the second, versus this is a direction that we need to go in to support the vulnerable in our city that are falling through the cracks and support all residents in feeling safe. So I think it's a really thoughtful, comprehensive amendment. I'm really appreciative of Councillor Dominato for bringing it forward, and I will wholeheartedly support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kirby-Young. Councillor Carr, please go ahead.
Yes, thanks so much, Chair. Like some of my colleagues, I'm a bit, dismayed by the last-minute changes, and rather than comprehensive, I find it confusing because the numbers floated out of the VPD meeting, the police board meeting last night, and in the media today, seem to still contradict some of the numbers that are being presented here. I just want to say that this is one of the problems that really, I believe, stems from the fact that this is a member's motion rather than a report to council. Because if it was a report to council, we would have had the analysis provided to us by staff. We are limited in this form of a member's motion of not being able to ask staff the questions. That's one of the rules around members' motions. So we are working in the absence of good, solid information, and instead have numbers that none of us, well, maybe some of us, but not all of us, are confident are the right numbers. And these are large amounts of numbers. When you're talking about 8 million, you're talking about a percentage for each of the additional police and the additional nurses to the budget of this city. That's 2 percentage points above. I don't know if that means that there's going to be motions when we deal with the budget that will reduce other services within the city to make up for that 2% increase, or if it will be an actual 2% increase on top of what we are presented. These are very serious decisions, and I don't want to, I'm not prepared to actually support the language that has been circulated in A and B because of the inability to know the ramifications of these numbers on services that would be otherwise funded within the budget that is not coming to us now until spring. From my point of view, without knowing what the trade-offs may be in the future, I can't support A and B, and I would like the motion severed. They can be severed in my mind in a block, with A and B as one severed and separate from C and D.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. Councillor Boyle.
Thanks. I just wanted to add, and I would also appreciate a severing, though I think it's B and C separate from D and E. But also wanted to speak in support, much as I have concerns about the process in particular around these funding requests. Strongly support PACT teams. That is something One City ran on. It's a conversation I've had with hundreds and hundreds of residents in the past few months. We heard so clearly about the need for non-police response. It was great to see the province announce $10 million in investments in PACT programs. I think that's really appropriate. I had also hoped to amend it onto this motion and then wondered if it would be called out of order because of it being, as was mentioned, sort of separate from this idea, but I'm certainly happy to support it being in here and support those programs going forward and measuring the outcomes in terms of how we allocate future funding for mental health services.
Thank you, Councillor Boyle. Councillor Fry.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'm back. And echoing Councillor Boyle, I had submitted an amendment which may now be out of order given some of the new content here, which is supportable, but of course reflecting some of the stuff we heard from the crisis centers of BC around where they see sort of treatment options for mental health and crisis intervention going. But I'm still a little bit struggling, and I'm wondering, Chair, if through you I can ask a question to the city manager, because I'm challenged with, maybe it's helpful if I just read out what the police budget says, which they say, City Council motion, hire 100 new police officers, years 4 and 5, operational review, 20 civilian professionals, estimate $15,711,000, which includes funding for recruit training, wage adjustment, uniform, equipment, inflation, and the authorized strength increases from additional staff investments above. We'll see, it'll take approximately 9 months for a new recruit to be deployable. So this is really talking about an immediate spending ask to meet this 100 new police officers. And I'm curious, given the tenor of A, which suggests our intention to make funding available to enable the requisitioning and hiring, but then in B, it talks about a full block of funding being $8 million. That's a $7.7 million funding gap. Curious if that seems contradictory. How would this staff interpret this, if I could ask through you to the city manager?
Thanks, Chair, through you. So our reading of B is that, or the motion generally is that this is funds that are being earmarked, that the allocation as contemplated in B is subject to a submission of an actual plan from the VPD, which would presumably set out timing, specific costing, and so on. Of course, we haven't seen that, so we're not in a position to comment on that. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, Mr. Chair, answering the question, but that's how we're reading the motion, is that there isn't any money being allocated at this point in time. It's an earmark.
Well, it does say direct staff to allocate a full block of funding in the city's 2023 operating budget for $8 million.
Right. So again, we would interpret that as we're building the budget, this would be factored in to the budget that's presented to council for approval.
So is 8 million seen as the limit, though? It's full in the sense that we are limiting this increase to 8 million?
For 2023, we would interpret this as 8 million being the amount. Yes, the complete amount.
The complete amount, despite the police suggestion of 15.7 million, we're committing to 8.
Yes, and again, through the chair, we understand that, again, having not seen the police report specifically, we understand that as an annualized figure, which wouldn't all be incurred in 2023, but there would be then a knock on an additional funding requirement in 2024 to make up the difference.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Thank you both. Councillor Fry, just want to confirm that you're still wishing to sever and which parts you wanted to separate out, if so. Sorry, go ahead.
As was suggested by Councillor Carr, I think AB as a block and CDE as a block is fine.
C and D as a block.
I think there's an E there as well.
Okay. Thank you. same. Councillor Fry, I just wanted to reconfirm the second part you wanted to sever out. Was that C, D, and E, or D and E? Okay, thank you. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you. My point of procedure is that severing doesn't accommodate how I wish to vote on a block. So I don't know if you want that information now, but it might be confusing otherwise for me, in fact, impossible for me to vote. I can only vote if A, B, and C are in one block, and then D and E are another separate block.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Carr.
So
Okay, thanks for your patience. There's no amendment in A. So we are going to take a vote for the amendments in B and C, and we're going to do it together to vote on A, B, and C. So clerk, could you please move us to the voting panel? Okay, in opposition, we have Councillor Meisner, Councillor Carr. No? Oh, apologies. Councillor Klassen hadn't voted yet. Okay. Councillor Meisner, Councillor Carr in opposition, Councillor Boyle in opposition, Councillor Fry in opposition, Councillor Bly is absent, and Mayor Sim is absent. Yeah. Please. Yep. 1 sec. Sorry, 1 sec. I just want to turn your microphone on. We will vote on A, B, and C
As
as a block. Yeah.
just as submitted by Councillor Dominato.
As submitted.
My Question, I just wanted clarification. We're voting on clauses A, B, and C as submitted by Councillor Dominato, correct?
Yes.
Yes?
Chair,
Yes.
so what we just voted on was A didn't have any amendments to it, and B and C were the amendments that were just voted upon. And now we're about to go to D and E.
Okay, I'm sorry, and can you clarify, Chair? Can you just clarify the vote for me, please?
The vote results? Yeah. Oh, I can't see those anymore.
I can get it. Just hang on a second.
I
Can we just take? Yeah.
we have a recess.
Yeah, we're just going to take a recess for a few minutes. Okay. Thank you. Okay, thank you everybody for your patience and apologies about the delay there. We're going to go back to the queue for Councillor Carr. Please go ahead.
I'm okay. Issue's been solved. Thank you.
Councillor Dominato, please go ahead.
Thanks, Chair. I'd like to move a motion of reconsideration on the last vote.
Yeah, please.
So moved.
So moved. Okay. Clerk, could you please take us to the voting screen? Thank you. We're voting on the reconsideration. Yes. Okay. Abstain was Councillor Boyle. Councillor Bly was absent. Mayor Sim absent. All the other votes in favor, so the motion carries. So now we are going to we voted in favor of the reconsideration, so we're going to vote again on amendments A, B, and C. And clerk, would you please move us to the voting screen? The motion carries. The amendments carry. In opposition, Councillor Carr, Councillor Boyle, and Councillor Fry. Councillor Bly is absent, and Mayor Sim is absent. Okay, now we are going to vote on amendments D and E. And clerk, if you could please take us to the voting screen. Okay, and that carries. Councillor Bly absent, and Mayor Sim is absent as well. Okay, now we're back to the main motion, and Councillor Dominato, you have the floor.
Thanks, Chair. I don't have any further amendments at this time. I will offer comments at the end.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Carr.
Yes, thank you. I have circulated an amendment. The second, I circulated one earlier, like before the meeting. But thanks.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. Then I had to change the language based on the amendment by Councillor Dominato. So look to my most recent email. And my amendments are in B and C, and they're adding a D, but now that might have to be just whatever the letter is because of the D and E. But my amendments are my amendments are, first of all, to write, the mayor would write to the Vancouver Police Board, not Board of Vancouver Coastal Health, because I'm differentiating the message to those two, and to write to the police board to say that the requisitioning and hiring of new police officers is contingent on Vancouver Coastal Health funding mental health nurses, and that then there'll be a letter directing the mayor to write to Premier Eby, the Board of Vancouver Coastal Health, the Provincial Minister of Health, and the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions on behalf of Council to request that the province fund the hiring of 100 mental health nurses on an urgent basis. So that I'm just going to speak to that first, which is to recognize that that the kind of work that is being anticipated in this motion requires the collaborative effort of the police and mental health nurses and other healthcare professionals. And I would not want to see the hiring of the police in the absence of the team support needed by the healthcare professionals. And I also do not want to see the city embark on this path of actually funding nurses when it is solely the responsibility of the provincial government to fund healthcare professionals for the most part. And I believe that this is a very slippery slope. I've heard many comments in this council chambers over a number of years about whether or not we're exceeding our jurisdiction to be funding certain things that are the provision, should be the jurisdiction of senior governments to fund. And I have supported, for example, on the issue of housing, supported our efforts on that regard, but I'm very nervous about the costs involved in funding nurses and the slippery slope that might be. So that's my first amendment. My second amendment is my first idea of amendment. My second is in C, and that is to allocate the block of funding. And it says up to 8 million, but sorry, I'm in the wrong motion. My second, amendment is in B, to say that block of funding would be additional to the baseline operating budget so that it can be voted on in an additional way, and that it would be contingent on the guaranteed funding and provision of the sufficient healthcare nurses. So those are my amendments.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Carr. I'm now going to move us to the amendment queue. So if you had put yourself in the queue previously, please re-add yourself to the amendment queue. That's unfortunately why the microphone keeps getting shut off. If I switch to the amendment queue, it shuts off the mic. So sorry about that. And this is the amendments by Councillor Carr to B and C, just reconfirming that. So Councillor Dominato, please go ahead. You have the floor. Oh, apologies. I lost you. Sorry.
I think I was on. Chair, point of privilege. I believe I was on the queue initially first. If the clerks could just update that. Okay. Can I go ahead?
Okay, so please go ahead. Sorry about that, Councillor Kirby-Young.
No problem at all. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm going to speak against this amendment, and for the simple reason that I think that I think it's important that we focus again on the vision here of what we're trying to achieve. And I am concerned that the outcome of this amendment will serve to delay the implementation of these badly needed programs. We know that there are going to be different hiring timelines and processes and training periods to ramp up. We know that sometimes we may be hiring new officers that go through training, some may be experienced, the same with nurses, they may come from different sources. And I think Council doesn't want to get down in the details of operationalizing this. We are committing to a vision, and I think that magical things happen when we're actually willing to step up on the core issues. We saw that, as you know, and again, I'll go back and repeat it again, with the announcement that happened with new Premier Eby on the weekend, who was willing to come forward and work with us. And what we are seeing here is a move towards a new paradigm of integrated teams, of integrated support, of coordination between the different levels of government. And I think that I won't suggest this is a delay tactic, but I won't be that explicit, but I think that what it will do is serve to delay. And I think it's really important that we take action. We had a loud and clear mandate on supporting moving forward with this piece, and that is what we are doing. So I am not going to personally support anything that I think is going to derail the speed at getting this up and running, because again, it's pretty cold comfort if you are the victim of a random attack, or if you are an individual that's falling through the cracks, that you're waiting until the stars align 100% on all the funding. And we know that we need to progressively move this forward. And this is about starting to take action and working together in partnership. So for those reasons, I'm not going to support the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Fry.
Yeah, unlike Councillor Kirby-Young, I think that this is largely in the spirit of the original motion when I read the title, enabling the requisitioning and hiring of 100 new police officers and 100 mental health nurses. It's hard to contemplate it as a delay. If it was two different things. Maybe they should have been introduced as two separate motions. But in any event, I'm a little conflicted on supporting this. I do support weaving these together, but I think we did hear pretty compelling stories from folks working in the mental health field that in fact, police attendance maybe isn't always the best approach to mental health and crisis interventions. And Stacey Ashton from BC Crisis Centers made a very compelling presentation at the time of the introduction of this motion, and then again this morning on Stephen Quinn's CBC, worth a listen to, because I think that there are certainly models that don't necessarily need to involve a police intervention for people who are in crisis, and in fact that oftentimes that can exacerbate more crisis. That being said, I'll support these amendments because I think that it is in the spirit of the original motion, and it is important, especially when we saw the discrepancy originally in this motion between the amount of funding for police and the amount of funding for mental health, and the I guess miscommunication or misunderstanding that the province was going to be contributing significant money towards this initiative, and in fact they weren't, and it was province-wide. So I think it's important to make sure that we really are putting the mental health component in here and not just a policing approach. So I'll support these amendments.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Fry. Councillor Boyle.
Thanks. I also will be supporting those, though, and will add the hiring of nurses is the piece of this I'm actually of the original motion that I'm most inclined to support, because like we continue to hear, so many people facing mental health crisis or a number of other crises need that health support. And what we see in programs from New West to Toronto and beyond is better outcomes for everyone when we're sending the right type of response, whether it's nurses or peers and mental health workers. So that is the part of this motion I'm most inclined to support. But as was said, I think if the intention is these are teams working together, we should absolutely be allocating this funding in a coordinated way rather than separate and unrelated to each other. And so I appreciate Councillor Carr putting forward language that connects these two pieces. So again, we are at least including a healthcare response in these investments. I think that is the most appropriate.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Boyle. Councillor Dominato.
Thanks, Chair. And I'd like to offer some comments to the amendment on the table. Echoing Councillor Kirby-Young's comments about the urgency and that the public was demanding action on this file. I think we heard that loud and clear over the last number of months and during the election. And from my perspective, if you consider the paradigm shift that we did see on the weekend, Premier Eby was very clear in his comments on Sunday that that they were supporting and expanding the CAR programs province-wide. And I think it's very clear from the motion that's been tabled as it's presented today already, is that it does, our motion does presume provincial funding, and presumably the 3 million province-wide will be from health, because that is the jurisdiction of the provinces around mental health nurses and nursing. Policing costs are actually the responsibility of local government. And so I anticipate we'll have an opportunity to seek funding with respect to those nurses. And so in that regard, I think this amendment is redundant. And in fact, that the existing motion already contemplates the possibility of provincial funding, which, like I say, Premier Eby was very clear on the weekend about that. And so for that reason, I won't be supporting the amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Dominato. Councillor Carr.
Just to conclude, I think we've heard many times at this council table the importance of delivering services, more services, especially in the downtown east side, but throughout the city, to address the mental health issues, the addiction issues, the trauma issues that people are facing, and that the nurses, those involved with training in health and mental health, are absolutely critical. And in fact, we've also heard at this council table that police alone not as part of a team, but alone, are not the solution for many of these issues, which really are very much focused on the health conditions of people, mental health and physical health. So I think that my amendment just says, look, let's not proceed with just the police. Let's proceed in a collaborative way with the police and the nurses and the healthcare professionals moving together as teams. And I love all these programs, CAR 8788, the ACT teams, the outreach teams. I mean, these are fabulous programs. And what we heard on the weekend was that the new premier, Eby, is willing to put money into this. So if we put it in, it just seems like such a wrong timing, especially if we're concerned, as I think many people around this table are, with the taxpayers and the burden that is placed on them to proceed with so many needed programs. So I say, let's just link it. Let's do a very concerted outreach to the premier and take him up on his offer. And he's from Vancouver. He knows how desperate the situation is here. So I'm not saying no to doing it. It's just the way we do it and who funds it that I think are critical.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. Seeing no one else on the queue to speak to the amendment, I'm now going to call a vote. Clerk, please move us to the voting panel, and Council, please register your vote on the voting panel for A and B. Okay, in opposition, we had Councillor Meisner, Councillor Kirby-Young, Councillor Dominato, Councillor Montague, Councillor Klassen, Councillor Joe, and absent Councillor Bly and Mayor Sim. The motion fails. And we're going to move back to the main motion. And Councillor Carr.
I'll continue after.
Okay.
Hey, Councillor Boyle.
Thanks, Chair. I also have two amendments that I circulated, and I think just to avoid confusion, I'll move them one at a time. So if you could move us to an amendment queue, I'll speak to the first one first.
Great. Okay, we're in the amendment queue. If you'd like to speak, please add yourself to the queue. Please go ahead.
Thanks. My first amendment is asking that included in the requirements and expectations around this funding, which is now $16 million in funding, that our staff work with partners to develop a detailed set of evaluation criteria and ongoing evaluation plan. In particular, what comes to mind is what we heard from Johnny Morris from the Canadian Mental Health Association, BC, that in their PACT pilot programs, they have been developing quite a comprehensive set of evaluation metrics for measuring the effectiveness of those programs. I think we could borrow from and look to those in terms of measuring the impacts that we're getting, whether you call it community impacts or you call it return on investment, we're putting 16 million more into these programs. And I think we have some responsibility to be accountable for ensuring that that funding is meeting the needs that we all recognize in terms of community safety and mental health crises across the city. And so hope we'll see some support for being able to monitor the effectiveness of these programs and make future decisions, funding and otherwise decisions based on outcomes and impacts.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Boyle. Councillor Kirby-Young.
Yeah, thank you. I'm really excited about this enthusiasm for outcomes. I guess I have a question with respect to sort of the governance around this one, is whether or not we're really in the framing of this amendment as to whether or not we're really creating additional work for our staff, as opposed to simply, if it was framed differently, as a request to Coastal Health or BPD or CMHA to provide us with information on the outcomes, because I know that those organizations, for example, with the joint partnership with CAR 8788 or with AOT, they have documented outcomes between the two organizations, but this looks like we're creating additional sort of repetitive work for our staff to do that. So I'm fully supportive of being focused on evidence-based investment and outcomes, but I think that this would be better framed as a request to those agencies to provide that information back, as opposed to, we always hear about sort of the limited resources and what we're piling onto staff, as opposed to asking our staff to do it. I'm also concerned with the time frame of coming back every 6 months. That might be, we typically get annual updates and reports from Coastal Health coming forward on key programs, and I'm not sure that that's realistic. So I'm concerned with the framing around this motion. I won't suggest that it's out of order because it says work with the VPD. We all know we can't direct the VPD or VCH or an external body, but I think that the framing of this motion is problematic. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Kirby-Young. Councillor Dominato.
Thanks, Chair. I always welcome discussion around evaluation of programs and services because in many cases, there are instances where governments have embarked on programs and they don't build in evaluation. And so you really don't get a sense as to whether you can get outputs, but you don't necessarily know whether you're actually making a difference. And that's what outcomes get to. But in that regard, I've moved an amendment to this amendment. It is to change the reporting timeframe to annually. And it is coming from a place of policy work I've done where, again, you can get outputs perhaps in 6 or 8 months, but you're not going to get outcome-based information that's substantive in my opinion. And so to have a reporting on the annual basis, I think is reasonable.
Thank you, Councillor Dominato. So I'm now going to move us to Amendment Q2. Please add yourself to the queue if you'd like to speak to that. Councillor Boyle, please go ahead.
Just to say, I think this is fine, provided those annual updates relate to timelines when we're making budget decisions, but can appreciate that fits with reporting out timelines and the balance of not creating additional work while making sure we're making informed funding decisions. So I'm fine with this.
Great, thank you. Councillor Carr.
Yeah, you know, my first inclination is to say this situation is so drastic and changing to the negative so rapidly that actually having reporting on a more frequent basis makes sense. I mean, we really want to solve the problems that this whole motion addresses. So hearing the responses, just like with COVID, when we were in COVID, we were getting daily updates. Because the situation was so drastic. So, you know, my inclination is to support the 6 months. You know, I think that yeah, my inclination is to support the 6 months. I absolutely believe that the reports are essential, and certainly if they're at least happening annually, that's better than them not happening, so that you can make those readjustments. But on an annual basis, your ability to readjust is more limited. It's going to take more time, and I just think we need fast action.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. Councillor Kirby-Young.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'd like to ask a point of information through you to staff of the question of the city manager, if I might.
Please, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I think because I think the devil's always in the details. I just would like to know how staff interpret this, and specifically in terms of when it says to direct working with the partners and paraphrasing to develop a detailed set of criteria and ongoing evaluation plan. Do staff view that you would be looking potentially to consolidate and report back information that is being collected by the different partners, or that you would be tasked with developing an entire new set of outcomes and that work would fall on city staff? I'm just wondering if you can speak to how you interpret this and what you would feel the work would be.
Thanks, Chair, through you. So yeah, I do think, appreciate the question. I mean, there is a limited ability, very limited ability for the city staff to collect this type of outcome information directly. So I would say we would be relying likely on data that's collected by these other parties and providing that back to council. That was what I would see the staff role is. You know, just kind of interpreting the motion as we read it right now.
Okay, and if I could just follow up on that, then just a follow-up question then. Does staff feel that you could do that within this language, which seems quite prescriptive to me, or do you think it would be clearer for staff if there was an amendment to that effect that you work to with the partners to secure stats on outcomes and otherwise, as opposed to this pretty directive language around developing criteria?
I think I mean, any clarity from council is to reflect intent is always helpful. Again, I'm just kind of reflecting back what I think the practical limitations are of what staff would be able to do in this realm. Obviously, if city staff felt that there were major gaps in the data that's collected, then that was something that we would identify to council. But I mean, at this stage, wouldn't be able to speak to that.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. And then hearing that, Chair, I have an amendment I'd like to propose.
Yeah. Councillor Kirby-Young, we do need to deal with the amendment to the amendment first.
Yes, we do. That is correct. Okay, thank you.
So let's do that.
Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Klassen.
Thank you, Chair. I just, again, I'm kind of reading this part D put forward by Councillor Boyle, and I must admit I am a little concerned. I 100% support the attempt at having accountability here, making sure that, you know, that the money is being spent appropriately. It's just that, as City Manager Mokri indicated, they are going to be sort of pulling data from these various bodies. There's also the line in there and other service provision partners, so we don't really have any clarity as to who those other partners might be. It's a bit vague as to what a detailed set of evaluation criteria and ongoing evaluation plan would look like. Again, I'm all for accountability, and I do want to make absolutely certain that the investments into this new programming will be successful and achieve their goals. I just am a little uncomfortable with how this is framed. And it does feel like we're going to be requiring our city staff here to be spending a lot of time on this reporting that otherwise might be spent on other objectives. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Klassen. Seeing no one else in the queue to speak to this amendment, I'm now going to call a vote. Clerk, you've just added yourself back, Kirby-Young, or Councillor Kirby-Young? Did you wish to speak before the vote? Okay, please go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say that it's problematic. I think it's not the spirit of being outcomes focused. It's the framing of the amendment that is challenging. And so I am inclined to vote against this amendment, but would welcome if subsequently the mover or another council member might want to bring forward another amendment that speaks more to what we heard from the city manager, but requesting that from partners. I'm just conscious of where we are in our procedural quagmire on the queue. And so I want to be very clear. I support the outcomes and getting the information, but I'm going to vote against this amendment because I think the language is problematic. But if a subsequent one came forward that sort of addressed that point, I would be happy to support that. Thank you.
Yes. Let me just turn your mic on. There you go.
Thank you, Chair. Can you and the clerks just simply clarify for me that we are voting on the amendment to the amendment at this time?
Yes, we are voting on the amendment to the amendment.
Thank you. I'll be voting in favor as I moved it.
Thank you. Seeing no one else in the queue, to speak to the amendment, we're now going to call the vote. So clerk, if you could please move us to the voting panel, and council, if you could please register your vote on the voting panel.
Just voting on the yellow text, correct? The amendment from
We're
council.
voting on the amendment to the amendment.
Oh, we're
That's
voting on
correct.
just the annually piece? Okay, thank you.
Yep, the amendment to the amendment
Okay,
was
just
by
on the
Councillor
annual piece.
Dominato.
Just wanted to be clear for the record. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, the motion carries, or the amendment carries. Councillor Carr is in opposition, Councillor Bly absent, Councillor Fry abstain, and Mayor Sim is absent. Now we're back to amendment Q1. If you wish to speak, please add yourself to the queue. Councillor Dominato, please go ahead.
I have no further amendments on this item. I think others may.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Carr.
Yeah, I have no further, I don't have any amendments to it, but I just want to reemphasize how important I believe the reporting is. And especially when you consider that not only how critical this issue is and how the situation is deteriorating fairly constantly, but also, we really know that this is a collaboration with the provincial government and that we do have a new premier. There will be another election forthcoming. It could be as long as almost 3 years from now, but it could be sooner than that. I'm disappointed that we don't have 6-month reporting because I think the situation is that critical that we need to be on top of it. But I will overall support the motion or the amendment.
Thank you. Councillor Boyle.
Thanks. I just wanted to speak to some of the questions raised to say the intention here is not that we entirely recreate the wheel, but it is that we coordinate, that we not just get different criteria from different places and programs where the metrics don't match each other and we have no way of looking at them relative to one another, which is sometimes what happens and which doesn't help us, I think, make informed decisions where these programs are sort of operating on a spectrum to address similar needs. And so the language to have staff work with these organizations and develop criteria isn't about a massive new amount of work, but it is about coordinating those metrics so that the services being provided by these various programs are being looked at as a spectrum, and then we're able to see what outcomes are being met and make decisions based on that. So I would rather we not just collect assorted data. I think it's important that data collection and evaluation be coordinated, and that's the intention here. Again, not a huge brand new piece of work, but coordination between services.
Thank you, Councillor Boyle. Councillor Kirby-Young.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'm back in the spirit of getting to a good outcome, and I'm happy to hear we're starting to get alignment around the table around the importance of data, but getting it from the appropriate sources and not sort of recreating the wheel or putting additional work on city staff. So to get us to a positive outcome, I submitted an amendment. If you want to move us to an amendment queue.
Yeah. Okay, now an amendment queue. Please add yourself if you'd like to speak after Councillor Kirby-Young.
Thanks. Thanks, Chair. I'll just speak to these sort of simple changes. You can see that I've struck out develop with request, a detailed set of evaluation criteria from the partners, and I've added the word coordinated, an ongoing coordinated evaluation plan for these efforts. And I think with those simple changes, I think that we hopefully will have alignment in getting that data and requesting that we're looking for integration, which happily we are starting to see from a number of different partners. So
okay, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Carr.
I'm not going to support that change in language. I mean, I don't mind the coordinated evaluation plan. Coordination is always good. But I'm not going to support the change from develop to request. And the reason is it's largely because of my experience on the climate file and the fact that in so many cases, information about greenhouse gas emissions and countries' efforts to reduce those greenhouse gas emissions has not been developed with very clear criteria and reporting that allows and enables every jurisdiction to make the changes needed to attack the crisis, which is now fully escalating because we are not adjusting appropriately. So I really believe that if you are dealing with a crisis situation, you need data. It's not something that should be a request for data, but a requirement for data in order to see which programs are being the most effective. I'm absolutely sure that data is there. The information would be there. And the agencies that are listed are the ones that would be able to provide it. It's a coordination effort on our part, but I'm not happy to see it. It, in my mind, weakens the ability to ensure we are going to tackle this problem effectively.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. Councillor Boyle.
Thanks. I share those concerns. This feels a little bit sort of wordsmithy, I guess. And I don't think it's, at best, it seems unnecessary. I can't quite understand what the difference here is, except that it's not clear in this new wording who we're requesting coordinate that evaluation plan. So to Councillor Carr's point, I guess it seems to me that if the city is providing funding, the city has some kind of coordinating role here, and that the original language captures that. If we're concerned about the additional weight on staff, and I think we always should be wondering about that, we are putting $16 million into something, so we could fund coordination of the metrics somehow through that. That seems reasonable, but here it feels to me like we're requesting detailed criteria from all over. That's useful to have, but unclear where this feels to me more confusing than the original language, which again is just intended to say, here we are, we're the funders, we're looking at this array of services, and we want to make sure that there's coordination of the metrics to inform our funding decisions on all of this. That seems fine to me, and I think the original language is actually clearer and certainly sufficient.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Boyle. Councillor Klassen.
Thank you, Chair. So I will be supporting Councillor Kirby-Young's amendment. I think what it does is it achieves the original spirit of trying to make sure that we have that accountability piece built into that was put forward by Councillor Boyle's original motion. I would also say that it, by being less prescriptive, it very likely will be more successful. And sort of in hearing from what I heard both Councillors Boyle and Carr said, I feel like sometimes we have to have some faith in our partners. So we're going to be talking to the Canadian Mental Health Association, BC chapter, and Vancouver Coastal Health, who work continuously with each other, the Vancouver Police Department as well. I think that if we ask them to try and harmonize some of their approaches in terms of information and data, they will deliver that indeed, without us actually requiring staff time to go out and create a framework for that. So I think that if we are able to indicate that this is our goal, then let our partners do that work for us. I think we'll probably succeed. So for that reason, I'd like to support the amendment to the amendment. And again, in that spirit of trying to make sure that we have accountability for this funding. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Klassen. Seeing no one else on the queue to speak to the amendment, I'm now going to call a vote. And Clerk, if you could please move us to the voting panel. And Council, if you could please register your vote on the voting panel, please. The amendment to the amendment carries. In opposition, we had Councillor Carr and Councillor Boyle. Councillor Bly is absent. Councillor Fry abstained, and Mayor Sim is absent. And we're now going to move back to Amendment Q1. And Councillor Kirby-Young, you have the floor. Please go ahead.
Fine for now, thanks.
Okay. Okay, seeing no one else wanting to add themselves to the queue, it's now time to vote on the amended amendment. Clerk, if you could please take us to the voting panel. Yeah. Yes, it is, Councillor Carr. Clerk, if you could please move us to the voting panel, and Council, if you could please register your vote on the voting panel, please. Okay, the motion carries, and with Councillor Bly absent and Mayor Sim absent. Now we're going to deal with the main motion as amended, and first speaker is Councillor Boyle. Councillor Boyle, please go ahead.
Thanks. I have a second amendment I'd like to move, and happy to pause so you can move us to an amendment queue.
Thank you. Okay, we're in amendment Q1. If you'd like to speak to it after Councillor Boyle, please add yourself. Yeah, please go ahead, Councillor Boyle.
So this second amendment is to request line item budgets from the Vancouver Police Board. And I'll just name that actually the specific language request here for line item budgets for the last 5 years and all years moving forward comes out of the ABC platform around a request for the city itself too, and it seemed appropriate to me that the same be requested of the Vancouver Police Board, considering this increase in investments and certainly a public interest in increased transparency and accountability around public expenditures. So I will leave it at that. Well, except the last thing I'll say is those of us who were here last term certainly I won't speak for all of us. I was conscious of how little information about the police portion of the city's larger budget we as councillors had, and the challenges that created when questions were asked publicly about, again, transparency and accountability of public expenses. It was clear through the provincial intervention that we don't have much say in what amount is given there, but I think this request is appropriate so that at least that we have that information, the public has that information. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Councillor Boyle. Councillor Kirby-Young.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Providing comment on the amendment, I'm actually happy to support this amendment. I think that a commitment to transparency is important. I would also note that the Auditor General had identified on their work plan that an audit for VPD in terms of outcomes and efficiency was part of the plan. And I think that we saw that commitment through the establishment of the Auditor General and sort of broad council support for that. So I'm happy to see it. I'm hopeful that the spirit of transparency will transfer over to the city's own budgeting process, because I recall a number of us requesting and asking for line item budgets for a number of departments that also have a significant spend in the $1.8, almost $1.9 billion budget, and other council members not supporting that in terms of accountability. So I certainly hope that we would apply a consistent and equitable lens across all of our key departments and expenditures, whether it's large projects in engineering, arts, culture, and community services. I think we all want to ensure that all of our taxpayer dollars are spent well and effectively and efficiently. So I am hopeful that we will see that same line of sight and detail into other departments, because I certainly do not feel as a councillor that I have been able to have that. And we have had to make a number of budget choices based on not having that line of sight. So this, as I put it, this sort of increased and ongoing commitment to transparency is, I think, a wonderful and magical thing. And I'm looking forward to being able to better understand what the outcomes are across a number of our different investments at the City of Vancouver. So I will happily support this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Fry.
Yeah, I can keep it pretty quick. I think at a bare minimum, this is totally essential, especially given the sort of discrepancies we've seen in the numbers so far, ranging from whatever it was, 3.5 billion to now 8 million and then 15.7. So I think that these are part of a larger conversation that needs to happen, and it's definitely germane to this particular motion that we're having before us, that we continue to do that work.
Thank you. Excuse me. Seeing no one else on the queue to speak to this amendment, I'm now going to call a vote. Yes, Councillor Klassen. Let me turn your mic on.
I am definitely testing my procedural muscles here that I am still learning how to use.
Likewise.
But I would like to get a clarification on this. Are we talking with regards to this motion? Are we talking the entire VPD budget for a line item, or are we talking about this particular spending associated with the 100 hire?
Are you asking me through the chair,
Through the chair.
to the city manager, or to councillor,
To
a particular councillor?
to Councillor Boyle. Sorry, thank you.
Councillor Boyle, would you like to respond?
Yes, I'm happy to. The intention was to request for the full budget. I understand there are some portions that might be subject to some kind of operational considerations that mean they can't be public, but otherwise, yes, the intention was the whole budget. Thanks.
Councillor Klassen, any more questions? Oh, and do you mind adding yourself to the queue? Apologies. That'd be great. Okay, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. It seems to me that we have shifted here, and again, as somebody who is a strong proponent of accountability, I'm just trying to figure out how we went from talking about funding related to the 100 police hires and the 100 nurses to looking at the entirety of the VPD budget. It feels like it's been sort of tacked on to the discussion here. And again, I think we have pledged during our ABC campaign and our platform to see full line item budgets going back for the last 5 years for city spending, which would include VPD spending. So I'm just wondering if this is separate business. But I want to make sure that we are focused on accountability. I just wanted to just be clear on what we were trying to achieve here.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Klassen. Seeing no one else on the queue to speak to this amendment, I'm now going to call a vote. Clerk, if you could please move us to the voting panel, and Council, if you could please register your vote on the voting panel. The motion carries with Councillor Bly absent and Mayor Sim absent.
Can I ask a point of procedure, Chair?
Yes.
And perhaps the clerks can confirm, I believe it's not necessary to report who's absent, just
okay.
Just those who are opposed, is that correct?
Okay.
But I'd save you a little step there.
Thanks, Councillor Kirby-Young.
You're welcome.
I appreciate that.
My clock is running on the main queue if things.
Okay, thanks for your patience. We're now back in the main motion as amended, and we have some councillors who'd wish to speak. Councillor Boyle, please go ahead.
Thanks. I am likely going to ask for some severing, but I'll wait and see if there are other amendments before I do that. So I'll go back on later and I'll make it very clear what parts and try to make it smooth. Thanks.
That'll help with my training wheels. Councillor Fry, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I was a little underprepared there. I have submitted an amendment to the clerk, and I'm just trying to pull that up. Oh, and look, the clerk was way ahead of me. So yeah, I had to revise this from the earlier one, given Councillor Dominato's earlier motions, or amendments, sorry. And really, this is a reflection of some of what we heard, and I think it's been kind of critically underserved in a lot of this work, that we haven't delved enough into some of the expert advice that we got from people like Stacey Ashton at the BC Crisis Center, and she had a great presentation this morning on Stephen Quinn that really dove into where we need to react. We've definitely kind of framed this as the policing side of mental health intervention, but we haven't really talked about non-policing crisis intervention, and I think that really specifically naming what Stacey Ashton was talking about, which is, really the intention and the interest, and I hope one that's shared by everyone at this council chambers, to divert people in mental health crisis from necessarily police and psychiatric intervention. So really, first and foremost, routing calls, wellness checks through a crisis lines and lens in order to de-escalate and resolve the crisis. Then secondly, dispatching a non-police crisis mobile response team. And then thirdly, providing crisis respite facilities, which could be as simple as someplace just for somebody to chill out, rather than taking them to a hospital and further traumatizing them when in many of these cases, we'll find that police who were brought in by or folks who were brought in by the police aren't actually detainable under the Psychiatric Act. And then they end up just being traumatized. And so where we can start to move towards an actual kind of human intervention that doesn't involve necessarily policing, crisis intervention and de-escalation is something that we've talked about a lot around these tables. And I hope this is something that council will support.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Fry. I'm now going to move us to the amendment queue. Should you wish to speak to this amendment, please add yourself to the queue. Councillor Carr, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Fry, for tabling this. I think a number of us actually during the election were invited to get more fully explore the kinds of services that are being provided by crisis lines, for example, where de-escalation takes place prior to any kind of calls being even done, that are still involving mental health officials. But those calls can really resolve issues that are really much better for the person who is suffering at the time. The crisis lines, I think, are number one. I can't remember the data, but it was pretty compelling in terms of the vast majority of those calls do successfully de-escalate the situation, thus not requiring a CAR 87 or CAR 88 or any of the other kinds of more elaborate responses. And that we also heard that there are many people who, if faced with a police officer arriving and they are in a mental health crisis moment at that time, they may have had experiences in their lives that lead them to react that much more negatively to that. So the provision first and foremost of nurses, healthcare professionals trained to de-escalate the situation that do not involve triggering a person in terms of a negative response or a fearful response is far more successful as well. And the respite facilities, of course, are absolutely critical because there's ongoing care there. So I think that this is a very thoughtful approach that we have learned as councillors from the professionals who were involved in delivering these services really work. So thanks, Councillor Fry, for putting this forward.
Thank you, Councillor Carr, for your comments. Councillor Dominato.
Thanks, Chair. Happy to speak to this amendment and appreciate how it dovetails with the overall motion and other amendments. And I think what I'll try to speak to, I spoke to a little bit last week, is the continuum of care that's necessary, and not only at the city level, but at the provincial level. And so when we talk about there's a lot of trying to make things black and white in terms of police-led or civilian-led, but the fact is all of these measures, CAR 8078, AOT, ACT, peer-assisted care teams, crisis centers call lines are all a continuum of care, and they're actually team-based, and they all involve a range of professionals that involve clinicians, psychiatrists, social workers, mental health workers, nurses, and police. And it is a team-based effort to support people in need. And so I think this very much aligns, and I did actually have the pleasure of joining a number of councillors at the Crisis Centre over the course of the election to learn more about the crisis lines and how they're de-escalating, and they're able to help people over the phone. And it works well, and it's effective. They want to ramp up. They want to do more. They've been engaging the province in those conversations, just as the CMHA has been doing around the peer-assisted care teams. But I think we need to recognize there are certain times when de-escalation over the phone will work fine. There are other times when de-escalation over the phone is not going to work. And so you need a range and a measure of options and teams and services and programs in place to support people. And so for me, that's what's really important, because at the end of the day, this is a nonpartisan issue. And I say that from a place of when it comes to, for example, the peer-assisted care teams, I met with members of the NDP provincial government around that program. I met with members of the BC Liberal Caucus. I met with the leader of the Green Party. I met with Metro mayors, and everyone agrees we have a crisis on our hands and we need to deal with it. We're trying to take steps here at the local level, but I want to ensure that we focus on that. We have people in distress in our communities, in our neighborhoods, and we're all trying to work together, but it is a continuum and it must be team-based. And if we don't have teams, then we actually will risk dropping the ball. I saw this happen in the education sector with youth at risk. And so I support the amendment. I appreciate Councillor Fry bringing it forward. I'll support it in earnest, just as I will support the rest of the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kirby-Young.
Yeah, thanks. This kind of takes me back because I might be, other councillors could correct me, but I might be one of the only folks around this table who actually volunteered at the crisis center and answered the calls on those lines, which a lot of psychology students did back in the day. And you would do your overnight shifts, which were usually when you got a lot of the most problematic calls, people calling in with suicidal tendencies. And we had really clear criteria and protocol around how and when you dispatched police. And it was typically if someone was going to do significant harm to themselves or to another person. And so I do think that those protocols exist when you're potentially dealing with a threat of violence to someone else, because sometimes it would be an individual that would call you, for example, in a domestic violence situation, and it wasn't always, interestingly, the person who was being harmed. Sometimes it was the person doing the harming that would call for an intervention because they wanted to be talked down, and sometimes we were actually successful. And that was a pretty scary thing to do, to be on the other end of that phone line and be tasked with that. But I am confident there's protocols in place. That said, I think it's really important that we remain open to exploring new models. We're seeing it with PACT coming on board and looking at the peer-assisted care teams. And I think we want to continue to look at how we can support the valuable service that augments that ultimate response, right? When there isn't an alternative, or when you have, in the case of a lot of the police calls, sometimes, a sort of oftentimes a quarter or of mental health calls might actually be a mental health professional that's calling for help to be accompanied. And so I just think we need to acknowledge there's a continuum here, but I am a huge proponent of looking for positive intervention opportunities. And I think that a lot of it will be in determining those protocols as to how and when you can deploy the alternative response and how and when you need to have a traditional response, because you really do have that life-threatening potentially situation. But I think we do want to be open to new models, and so I'm happy to support it for that reason. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Klassen.
Thank you, thank you, Chair. Really brief remarks. I intend to support Councillor Fry's motion, which I think is very much in the spirit of the work that we're doing here today. As Councillor Dominato described, we are in a crisis situation in terms of some of the challenges on the street. We've put forward some ideas here to try and to make a difference, and I think that this is very much aligned with where we would like to go with this. This is an opportunity to be creative. We're doing some things that local governments don't often get into when we're talking about healthcare services and mental health services. So I'm, again, very supportive of this, and thank Council for all of their comments on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Klassen. Seeing no one else on the queue to speak to this amendment, I'm now going to call a vote. And Clerk, if you could please move us to the voting panel. And Council, if you could please register your vote on the voting panel. And the motion carries unanimously. Okay, we're now moving back to the main queue of the motion, and Councillor Fry, you have the floor.
Oh, yeah, that's it for amendments for me. I'll just wait it out and maybe come back in on closing.
Okay, sounds good. Councillor Klassen.
Myself as well, Chair. I'll wait till final comments.
Yeah. Councillor Kirby-Young. You're on there twice. You want me to skip ahead?
Sure.
Councillor Dominato.
Uh, Hang on, sorry. Go.
Oh, 1 sec.
Problem with mics today.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Thanks. Just clarifying, it's a point of information that we're, there's no further amendments. Oh, I see Councillor
Not
Brown
at
on the
this
queue, so I'm not
time.
sure if that- Okay, fantastic. I'll just offer some closing comments with respect to this motion. I actually probably said a lot just a few minutes ago, so I don't want to repeat, but for me, and I know for my colleagues that ran together in ABC Vancouver, we heard very clearly, as I said, urgency earlier, demanded by residents, demanded by neighborhoods to come up with a framework to respond. And the motion I brought forward last week certainly builds on that in terms of the 100 mental health nurses and the 100 police officers. And with the timing of the provincial announcement on Sunday, the Premier's announcements around Safer Communities initiative, it seemed to make sense to build in some of the other pieces that we had committed to in our platform, which as I referenced earlier and made the amendment around the peer-assisted care teams, and didn't know at the time that they'd be deploying 12 teams and funding 12 teams, but this has been a passion project for me as well, is to see this complementary program to go alongside with the existing CAR 788 AOT and ACT teams. And so I'm really pleased that that has been supported by council. And I think harkening back to my points earlier around this being a nonpartisan issue, what I hear from the public of all walks of life, all over the city, is compassion, and that they see people in distress and they want to help. They don't know how. They're looking to all levels of government to unite and to collaborate on these very complex issues. And I think collaboration is at the heart of this in terms of the motion and the measures, but not just collaboration of the different levels of government, but as I mentioned earlier, the collaboration of the professionals that have touch points with individuals, whether those individuals are repeat offenders or whether those individuals are struggling simply with homelessness or a mental illness or an addiction. But my experience has been that team-based initiatives where you have open dialogue, clear communication, roles and responsibilities around response, lifts people up and you mitigate the risk of people falling through the cracks. And I do think we have that circumstance right now for a variety of reasons that I won't have enough time to cover in my last couple of minutes here. But I will close simply by saying that I think this is incredibly important work, and clearly it aligns with the province. Premier Eby was very clear that we cannot afford to do nothing. We cannot afford to wait or delay. And in fact, his comments at Sunday's press conference very much reinforced that we're on the right track with these initiatives that are being brought forward to council today and deliberated on. And so I see a great alignment there, and I was honored to bring this forward on behalf of our team. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dominato. Just looking at the time here, I'd like to move a motion to extend this item and then take a dinner break after. Oh, okay. Apologies. I'd like to ask someone to do that. That'd be great, Councillor Carr.
I move a motion to extend past 5 to complete this item.
Okay, all those in favor say yay.
Okay.
Did you want to speak to it, Councillor Kirby-Young?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm wondering if there's the will of council, knowing we have one other item after that, if there's a will to not take a break and then to move to complete the business as opposed to just this item. If so, and I'm seeing some smiling faces, would like to, I don't know if Councillor Carr would like to do it, or I'd like to amend Councillor Carr's motion that we move to complete the business.
Yeah, we can do
To
that.
complete the business.
So you're moving a motion to complete all of the business.
Yeah, to extend past 5 o'clock to complete the business.
I'll
Okay.
just withdraw.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Carr. Let's keep it simple. Okay, so all those in favor of completing the business today say yay,
Okay.
and all those opposed say nay. Okay, the motion carries unanimously. Thanks for helping to keep that simple. Okay, we're now going to continue on the main queue here, and next up is Councillor Boyle. Councillor Boyle, please go ahead.
Thanks. First, I'm hoping that the clerks can circulate a copy of the full amended motion to us before we vote. I'm hoping to sever out for B and C for a separate vote, but maybe I'll clarify that once I take a look at what was just circulated. So give me a moment on that. I will, yeah, happy to have A, B, and C separated all together, and then the rest, unless there's more detailed severing someone else requests. I am very happy to support the portions of this motion that look to funding PACT teams, look to recognizing and appreciating the investments in Indigenous justice centers, the amendment for a continuum of crisis care services, and would just like to again reiterate my concerns about the process that we've taken in terms of the funding allocations, the lack of detail and information that was before council originally, and then the many updates and changes. I recognize, of course, that the provincial announcement has changed a little and we're all adapting, but feel I've received very little detail and information to be making these decisions, and I hope moving forward that that's not the case. It's not clear to me if that information existed somewhere else and I wasn't privy to it, or if we're all operating on the fly a bit, but particularly in allocating this amount of money, though really in any decision, I hope we will see more information shared with more advance notice so we can be making informed decisions of this nature. And again, the process we've gone through this time, I feel was very lacking on that front. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Boyle. Councillor Montague.
Thank you, Chair. I guess I'll address one of the most obvious points here to me. While I appreciate the input from the speakers we had and then council today, obviously the support for peer-assisted care, crisis lines, respite facilities, non-police responses, et cetera, all super important, all things that I too support. You know, obviously there's some clear opposition around the police. I do believe there's a real misunderstanding when it comes to what mental health calls the police are actually going to, why they're going to them, and what happens at those calls. I think there is a real lack of understanding there. This thought of supporting everything but the police aspect is a real problem for me, obviously. I think it's turning a blind eye to the overall issue. And I think we have to look at the facts that are in front of us in a lot of these cases. The facts are that 13,000 to 14,000 calls are taken or are sent to the VPD that involve some sort of mental health component. 84% of those, so a very large aspect of those, are they involve some sort of harm or danger. They necessitate a police response. There's victimization. There's criminal code offenses, statutory requirements around things like mental health apprehensions. 26% of those calls that police get, so 26% of 14,000 calls, it's about 10 calls every day, are actually from healthcare professionals. There's all kinds of media stories that talk about this, but that's a huge number. 26% of all mental health calls that the police go to come from healthcare professionals. 12% of those involve weapons. Like it or not, police need to be part of this solution. The motion that Councillor Dominato is proposing is aimed at being part of a plan to reduce a person's involvement with the criminal justice system, reduce their involvement with law enforcement, emergency health services, providing proactive and reactive responses, peer-assisted care for common interventions, 100 mental health nurses supported by police officers to deal with those high-risk interventions, those 26%, the 12% with weapons, those types of calls. ACT and AOT for interventions in between things that either peer-assisted care are not suitable for or that police officers shouldn't be attending. I think in order to solve a problem, we have to come at it from all different angles. This is a collaborative approach, and I think it's the right direction, and it's supported by the provincial government, as we've all heard, and I'll be supporting it. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Montague. Councillor Carr.
Yes, thanks, Chair. First of all, I just want to acknowledge that we have an escalating crisis in the city, especially in the downtown east side, but it is citywide. And it's related to mental health and addictions primarily, and it spills over, however, into homelessness and public safety issues. And it's something that we need to tackle as a city. And it's without our tackling it, it is only going to get worse. It's certainly happening, not just in this city, but my experience of being at the UBCM meeting in September is it's happening in all the major cities of this province. It's happening, in fact, all up and down the coast of North America and in other places. But that doesn't that means that all of us have to be tackling it. We should learn from each other as well what's really working. What does work and what we've seen has worked very effectively is where we have responses to a particular crisis that involves the professionals who are most able to deal effectively with that moment of crisis. And that does mean having people who have the experience in mental health and addictions in particular. And it does mean that there are very important times when public safety or personal safety is at risk, when the police need to be attending as well. So it's a partnership out there. And I think the programs that we've seen really prove successful are the ones that are mentioned in this motion. I do also support more dollars being spent on this. You can't solve crises without investing in the personnel and the programs and initiatives that are having the positive impact in addressing the crises. However, I have concern. One last point on the positive note. I am very happy to hear Premier Eby and the province step forward to say they too recognize this crisis and are willing to invest in solutions. I think that the partnerships are the key thing. Work led by the healthcare professionals is predominant, but it is a partnership with the VBT. My big concern with this motion is that the numbers that are being cited in terms of how much needs to get incorporated into our next budget have been escalating over the last week. I'm unclear as to why the original numbers were not the right numbers. What has made them change? Are there still more changes that will be needed? What impact is that going to have on the city and other programs that we must fund? I'm hopeful that the councillors sitting around this table who vote for this are going to be willing to have an increase to our budget, not just a let's fund this, but cut a whole bunch of other things approach when it comes time to dealing with the city's budget. So on that, I'm also going to be supporting or asking for severing of some sections of this motion, and I'll be able to tell when I see the final motion in front of us.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Carr. Councillor Joe.
Okay, thanks, Chair. So I think this is a motion we have been waiting too long. We can't afford the public safety keep getting worse. The cost of the small business, they replace their broken window. The cost of the victim went to healthcare system, get treatment. The hurt from their family and friends. And the level of concerns and fears the family doesn't want to work at night in their neighborhood, including my wife with my baby. All these are not even quantifiable. So of course, we should use empathetic and non-judgmental approach. This is the motion provide us the opportunity for us to evaluate this methodology within 1 year and using that empathetic and non-judgmental approach. I also understand there are different opinions against police. We should establish a system and bring more transparency and accountability, hold them accountable. So, but not like spread out the misinformation, spread out the hate. And that's exactly what we would like to do. And is this the only solution? Of course not. This is the only one solution to such a very complex issue, but that's a very good first step. So because of all the victims in the past, all the potential victims, if we do not pass this motion, I'm going to support this motion. I also encourage my fellow councilor to join me and support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Fry.
Thanks, Chair. Well, I will be seeking to sever out, I think it's A, B, and C in the final vote. Good debate. 100 police officers, 100 mental health nurses. They're nice round numbers, but there's little by the way of sort of cogent budgeting in here and what this is going to mean for our overall budget, and that leaves me a bit nervous. We see from the police 2023 budget that just came out that they're estimating these new VPD hires in that 2023 budget, inclusive of the 100 officers and 20 new civilian staff, will be $15.7 million, which is a far cry from the $3.5 million that was originally proposed, or the subsequent $8 million as amended. So I don't know where that money's coming from and what that's going to mean for our budget here at the City of Vancouver. And that's part of a $38.5 million VPD budget ask for 2023. So we've kind of setting a stage here for what it looks to me like a little bit of a blank check approach. We're literally formally advising council's intention to make funding available to the Vancouver Police Board and VCH to enable the requisitioning and hiring of 100 new police officers and 100 mental health nurses, was actually no tallying of what that's going to cost us. I do really appreciate the comments from my esteemed colleague, Councillor Montague. I appreciate that you bring that very unique perspective, and I don't dismiss for any iota or a minute that the extent to which the VPD have to deal with folks in mental distress, mental health crisis, let alone the violent repeat offenders and the muggings and the weapons and all those things. And when it comes to mental health crisis, it's no doubt that the police bear the brunt of this work. But with that said, we haven't ever really seen any alternatives. So the police are doing this work, but there hasn't been those interventions. And this is a moment for us to sort of talk about what those interventions could look like. And I really do appreciate, the support for my amendment earlier, but really the folks who came and talked about really how important it is to have a non-policing intervention when somebody's in mental health crisis and what that can exacerbate and what these options like a respite place for folks who are in crisis. So I really, really think that that's something that can help really weed out some of the more predatory elements from some of the folks who are just struggling and really having a hard time with everything from COVID to homelessness to poverty to toxic drugs. People are experiencing crisis for very real reasons. We heard some real direction from the Premier about intervention in the criminal justice system. In particular, stuff that isn't touched here, but some of the pieces around the pretrial custody and approach to bail and repeat violent offenders and Indigenous justice centers and mental health and addiction services and treatment mental health crisis teams. And specifically, and I want to read from what they describe in the provincial press release, expanding mental health crisis response teams into more communities so that police can focus on crime and people in crisis are met early on by healthcare workers and community members. And so I think that speaks to the importance of that sort of packed team approach, the kind of crisis intervention. But I still come back to the numbers, right? I heard $3 million from the province to address mental health interventions across the province. We don't know where the funding is going to come from for Vancouver and what 100 mental health nurses is going to look like for Vancouver, who's paying. They're big unknowns, and I worry about how our budget's going to be affected by this, what it's going to mean to other services that Vancouverites rely on across our city that we pay for. And I'm hopeful that as we move forward, we're not stripping out valuable services for the city of Vancouver in order to pay for these commitments and this sort of blank check that we're writing for 100 new police officers and 100 new mental health officers or mental health supporters without any kind of reckoning of what it's going to cost. So, yeah, so I will be moving for the sever of ABC. Oh, sorry, and that. Okay, you know.
Please don't physically sever me. I feel like I've been severed today already. So, Councillor Fry, thank you for those comments. Councillor Klassen.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Montague earlier on spoke to the policing aspect of this. So I'd like to bookend my comments around the nursing piece. So many of you know that I've been working in the seniors health sector for the last many years. And the principal role that I've had is to advocate around staffing shortages that have resulted from not enough nurses, not enough healthcare workers. And that work has brought me into meetings with cabinet ministers, both federally and provincially, with multiple staff, agencies like the BC Nurses Union, the BC College of Nurses and Midwives. And we are all unified in the idea that we need to really sort of pull out all the stops to make sure that we can grow and sustain our healthcare sector. And particularly nurses, which are always in high demand. This idea, this proposal that our campaign put out a few months ago, it obviously caught on. And when we talked to people on the doors, there were a lot of people who were very excited about this idea. But there were, I think, some important questions. Why is the city moving into this? Why are we doing this? And so there has been some skepticism about, where are you going to find these nurses? Well, the fact is that there is a lot of agencies that are working very hard to try and build the ranks of healthcare workers right now. Well, we've got immigration changes. We've got the provincial government that has been making a number of changes to cover the cost of bursaries, to allow nurses to train and ladder up through their careers. There's an enormous amount of initiative and inertia around trying to grow our healthcare system. Including Minister Sean Fraser from Immigration and federally announcing that they were going to ramp up to 1.5 million new immigrants at record levels, and with a big focus on healthcare workers. So those kinds of opportunities are going to help us to grow the ranks here. Now, my mom was a nurse. I grew up in the household of a nurse, and nurses are very special people. And we are going to be going to have to work very hard to attract and woo people to come and work in this work, because it's going to be hard work. It's going to be meaningful but very hard work, dealing with people who are in distress. But if we can create the right culture in our workplace here, make the conditions inviting, make sure that people are safe when they're doing their work, as well as feeling very supported, then we will succeed. This is an extraordinary move for a local government to be moving into this area. It's because it's an extraordinary time. As Premier Eby said himself, he's never seen the downtown east side so bad. I think we see across the city, this is not something that's localized to the few blocks of the downtown east side. We've got challenges in every part of our community and right across the metropolitan region. So I think we've taken a very strong and bold step here, but I think it's one that's very much needed for our times and the situation that we're in right now. So obviously I will be supporting this motion. And I would like to thank everybody for, I think, a very interesting and exciting debate about this plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Kirby-Young.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I will be brief and just say that you cannot put a price on public safety, and you cannot put a price on mental health and wellness, and we cannot afford not to do this. And I think that Premier Eby expressed the same sentiment when he made his announcements. I also think that it's important because I support a continuum of options and continuing like in other models to be able to deal with the situations where you don't have to have a police response. But I will echo some of the comments by my colleague, Councillor Montague, that if a quarter of your mental health calls are actually being initiated by a mental health professional, that when people say, just send a social worker, there are times when you just can't. And it is those individuals who are asking for that support to stay safe. I also think that it's an incredible inflection point in our city where we can stand up and take action. And again, I talked about quibbling over the budget, but I go back to my point, we can't afford not to do it because we are failing people. We have people that are falling through the cracks. And that's what I really like about looking at the description of the assertive community treatment teams and the outreach teams. These are proactive programs that identify some of the highest risk, highest need individuals to help them stabilize, for example, when they are coming into housing or coming out of situations, or they're in that housing, that they can stay in it. They provide vocational services. They are teams with nurses, social workers, vocational support, so that ideally, and I think we're seeing it in terms of some of the stats that have been presented, you are diminishing the demands and the revolving door phenomenon where you have the same individuals, for example, that are coming into St. Paul's every day. And that is demoralizing. That puts a huge pressure on the healthcare system, and that is really demoralizing for people, whether it's the police officer or the social worker who is having to deal each time with the same folks, sometimes in the same day. And that's, I think, really significant and important to mention. And I can't count the number of times in the lead up to this last election that people said that they felt either unsafe in their neighborhoods, Vancouver didn't feel like Vancouver anymore, that we were at a tipping point, something needed to be done. And this is what action looks like, guys. And it's about stepping up. And so I am incredibly grateful that we're taking this bold step. Do we have all the answers worked out? No. Is it perfect? No, but we've never dealt with such an extraordinary time in our city. And I'm incredibly grateful that the province is stepping up as well and following suit. And so I'm looking forward to putting some support and resources in place to tackle some of these challenges. Will it be difficult? Yes. Is it going to take some time? Absolutely. Do we need to do it? You bet we do. And I'm very happy to support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. There were two requests to sever the motions, so I'd like to suggest that we vote on each part of the motions separately. Yeah.
I'm not sure about anybody else, but I can sever, I think Councillor Boyle said A, B, and C can be dealt with in one block for me, and D, E, F, and G can be a second block.
Yeah. Everybody's okay with that proposal? To sever A, B, C and vote on the rest? Councillor Fry, any thoughts? Okay. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. We're going to sever A, B, C, and we're going to vote on D, E, F, and G. So clerk, if you could please move us to the voting screen. And again, we're voting on parts D, E, F, and G. Oh, we're voting on A, B, C. Oh boy. Apologies. Just so we're clear, we're voting on A, B, and C right now. I guess if I could turn around and look at the screen at the same time, this wouldn't be happening, but here we are. So voting on A, B, and C. And the vote carries. In opposition, Councillor Carr, Councillor Boyle, and Councillor Fry. Okay, now we are going to vote on the remaining parts of the motion. That would be D, E, F, and G. Clerk, if you could please take us to the voting screen, and councillors, if you could please cast your vote. And that carries unanimously. I'm going to suggest we take a 5-minute bio break, and we'll be back in 5 minutes. Thank you. everybody, and thanks for allowing us to take that little break there. So we've concluded item 11 on the agenda. We have one more item. That is item number 12, transport pricing, stopping the road tax. Member motion B.6, which was moved and introduced by Councillors Klassen and seconded by Councillor Kirby-Young. As speakers were heard on this item on November 16th, we'll move directly to discussion. If you're interested in discussing, councillors, please add yourself to the queue. And we're going to start with Councillor Carr. Councillor Carr, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks so much, Chair. I have circulated an amendment to this motion, and I'm assuming that wasn't a beer. We are, so if we can move to an amendment queue all.
Yep, I'll move us to the amendment queue. Please continue.
Great, thank you. So the reason that I submitted this is because I think the intent of this motion is to ensure that any discussion around transport pricing isn't focused solely on Vancouver and in specific downtown Vancouver, but in Vancouver itself. My amendment makes it clear that that would be okay. Any exclusive or any focus exclusively within Vancouver, if we stop that work, that's certainly a choice of this council. And it would not, in my mind and in the mind of people that I've talked to, inhibit work if the wording is changed, as I suggest, to enable staff in Vancouver to continue, and is a continuation of work with Metro Vancouver and the province on a regional approach. And I remember that did come up at the time where this was first introduced into our climate emergency action plan in terms of a more regional approach. I've certainly talked to various organizations, including the Downtown Vancouver Business Improvement Association, about this, and their response to me was that a regional approach they could maybe live with, but it is the focus on Vancouver solely that has been a problem. I talked to staff at Metro Vancouver who also conveyed to me that if we were to stop all work, including the City of Vancouver's collaborative work within the region and, as I say, with the province, that would be extremely difficult because there is a need to look at how we are going to compensate for the decreasing revenues to TransLink that are currently supplied by the gas tax. And it could be that a transport charge is, some of the possibilities that I know are being explored might relate to mileage, might relate to just a straight up vehicle charge. It might be something quite different than I think people have feared, which is some people have feared, which would be like if you enter the downtown core. So I'm really, really pleading with you all to enable this work to go forward, because transportation is the biggest source of greenhouse gas emissions within Metro Vancouver. It is the second biggest source of greenhouse gas emissions within the city of Vancouver. And the solutions are very much in making sure we have a very robust transit system and opportunities for people to easily choose to not have to use a car. So that is my amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. Councillor Klassen.
Thank you, Chair. I'll support Councillor Carr's amendment. I think to her point that we need to be as creative as possible in this time, but I think that what we heard and what we felt, certainly from the community, certainly the downtown business operators and people living in the community there, that we were to focus this as being a Vancouver only initiative is something that I think we were not going to support. So that's why ending the road tax is a commitment that we made early and repeated often during our campaign. But I think that this This amendment essentially underlines something that is mostly indicated in the original motion, but I don't mind the additional emphasis, and so therefore I will be supporting the motion, the amendment, sorry.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Kirby-Young.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I wonder if I can ask a point of information through you to the mover of the amendment?
Yes.
I'm just wondering, Councillor Carr, in the second paragraph, the language says, exclusive of staff participation in regional transportation discussions and conversations. So to me, that clearly said that acknowledged that there are regional conversations going on with respect to a potential regional mobility strategy, and it's already there. So I'm wondering, did you not see that or think that the language was sufficient?
Yes, actually, I did read that, and I did have a question in my mind, but more importantly, people that I talked with who involved in these discussions at Metro Vancouver had the same question I did, which it seems, in the absence of that second paragraph, it almost seems the first paragraph seems contradictory. So it's saying stop all work, and that's why I included the word exclusively within the city of Vancouver as language, and just and made it clear by adding the related work to current regional, and I added provincial work because that is also going on. So that emphasizes or corroborates the second paragraph of this motion, but there was a sense that taken alone, that first paragraph could be seen to obviate the possibility of Vancouver staff being involved in regional and provincial work.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Carr, and thank you, Chair. To me, it's redundant, but I mean, I'm happy if councillors want further emphasis. I think it's pretty clear from the existing motion that says quite clearly to stand down on work, quote unquote, within the city of Vancouver and specifically for downtown and the Central Broadway corridor and exclusive of the regional. Having said that, I'm happy that we finally got to this point in providing comment on the motion, because I remember advocating along with Councillor Dominato at the time, and we've got some new folks around the table, that it made the most sense for this council to pursue a regional solution, and we proposed that that was the direction that we should go, as opposed to Vancouver, quote unquote, going it alone, and a Vancouver only solution made in Vancouver, and that was not supported by the last council of the day. And then the result is we spent $1.5 million and a whole bunch of time, and here we are. And now we're actually talking about a regional solution. It reminds me of ride hailing when we talked about that, and Vancouver wanted to go it alone, and we had some discussion, and again, that didn't make sense to me. And then I anticipate there'd be pushback from some other mayors, and people don't artificially stay within one boundary. They go to a hockey game and go back to Burnaby, or they go downtown. And the next week we had pushback from the other municipalities, and we want to be a good regional partner. And then lo and behold, we were reversing back on that decision, and we were going with a regional solution. So I think this is where we should have started. I think these conversations do need to happen. Not going to call it out of order, but I think it is redundant. I think it's, to use some of the comments earlier, it's wordsmithing, but if it provides some additional comfort for people and we get alignment around sending a very clear signal as to what it is that we are pursuing, then I will support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Boyle.
Thanks. I'll also support this amendment and appreciate the work Councillor Carr did to reach out to Metro and others and just make sure that what the language that we are approving is clear to them and others in terms of what the direction is around those important regional and provincial conversations that, as was noted, become more and more important as the revenue from the gas tax decreases. And we want to ensure that we are continuing to provide across the region strong and growing public transit for residents to get around. So happy to support this amendment.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Dominato.
Thanks, Chair. And like my colleagues, I'm also happy to support the amendment. I think that it kind of dovetails with our earlier conversation, is that as we deal with complex climate issues and transportation issues in our region, that we need to continue to be active regional participants and like Councillor Kirby-Young articulated quite well earlier, is that we were having this conversation about why would we be bringing in a transport pricing, congestion pricing model solely for the city of Vancouver. And so I would hearken back to, again, the importance of thinking regionally. And while we sit here and represent residents of Vancouver, we need to be also thinking regionally. And so to continue to participate in those conversations, I'm happy to support that. I do recognize it may be a little redundant, but again, I think it's clear, and I do appreciate the dialogue that's taken place.
Thank you, Councillor. Seeing no one else in the queue to speak to the amendment, I'm now going to call a vote. Clerk, if you could please move us to the voting panel, and Council, if you could please register your vote on the voting panel. And the vote is unanimous in favor. Councillor Boyle, you wish to speak to the amendment? Is that correct? To the amended motion? Yeah. Just going to put that on the main queue. So I'll just clear that. Actually, just let me ask. Councillor Carr is going to go first, and then we'll come back to you. So
Close, it's fine.
yeah, Councillor Carr, please go ahead.
No, I said I'll close.
Oh, you'll
it's-
close.
it's gonna
Okay.
move me.
Okay. Councillor Boyle.
Thanks. I, as I said, was happy to support that amendment, and certainly agree that a regional approach makes the most sense because we're looking at transportation across the region. I will just name some concern that our climate emergency actions, which include significant and important actions to improve health and safety in terms of transportation, in terms of building emissions and more, was relying on funding sources from mobility pricing and the parking permit program. It looks like neither of those will happen. And so I just want to name, as we will hear in the next update, I'm sure, as we heard in the last update on our climate work, that those gaps in funding, unless they're filled, lead us on a path to not being able to meet those targets, and as well make it significantly more difficult to fund initiatives that we all have discussed, including improved active transportation and safe pedestrian infrastructure for routes to schools. We regularly hear from parent advisory councils and others about the need for a flashing beacon or an additional barrier or other infrastructure to improve safety in getting kids to school. Those types of funding requests were part of the Climate Emergency Action Plan. Similarly, work to protect renters and seniors in buildings where they currently have no way to mitigate the heat and other impacts of extreme weather conditions. As we saw in the the death of 100 Vancouver residents in the last heat dome, those types of investments are also part of our Climate Emergency Action Plan, and also we'll see a funding gap based on these two policies not moving forward. So again, I think a regional approach makes the most sense. I just want to continue to flag that those are needs, are significant climate needs, but also health and safety needs that we are going to need to figure out funding sources for. And if it's not this, I hope Council will be creative in how we figure out how to close those gaps, because those are very important needs. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Fry.
Thanks, Chair. Appreciate the amendment. I'm going to be abstaining on this particular vote, and mostly just because I find it to be kind of conflicting and disingenuous for me to support the notion of stopping the, air quotes, road tax. I think that we do have to recognize that, and I support the intention of this particular motion and a regional approach and all those pieces, but I think it's also behooves us to recognize that that we are going to have to recognize at some point that the gas tax is not going to be there for us, and that we have infrastructure needs and renewal needs that are going to land on everybody in Vancouver, and we're going to have to figure out ways to pay for it. And it could be through property taxes, or it could be through user fees. And at some point, we're going to have those conversations around, public parking on private private parking on public streets. We're going to have those conversations around what autonomous ride-hail vehicles are going to mean and who's going to pay for the infrastructure to support those. These are around the corner for us. So I appreciate the amendment. I support the intent of this, but because I do recognize that at some point we're going to have a conversation around how we pay for these roads, I'm going to abstain from the vote.
Thank you, Councillor. Seeing no one else on the queue, I'm now going to call the vote on the motion as amended. Clerk, could you please take us to the voting screen? And Council, could you please register your vote on the voting panel? This is the motion as amended, just to clarify. Okay, the motion carries with abstentions from Councillor Carr, Councillor Boyle, and Councillor Fry. And that concludes item 12 on the agenda. The standing committee portion of this meeting is now complete, and we will now convene in council with Deputy Mayor Lisa Dominato to deal with the recommendations and actions from today's committee meeting.
Thanks, Chair. We will now convene in council to deal with the recommendations and action from today's Standing Committee on Policy and Strategic Priorities meeting. Clerk, may we have the roll call, please?
Yes, Mayor Sim is on a leave of absence for civic business. Councillor Carr. Present. Councillor Kirby-Young. Councillor Dominato is in the chair. Councillor Bly is on an leave of absence. Councillor Boyle.
Present.
Councillor Fry. Councillor Montague. Councillor Klassen. Councillor Meisner.
Present.
Councillor Joe. The meeting has quorum. Deputy Mayor Dominato.
Thanks, clerks. I now need a motion to adopt the Standing Committee's recommendation for items 11 and 12.
So move.
Councillor Carr, seconder. Councillor Joe, thank you. All those in favor, say yay.
Yay.
And that carries. Thank you. I now need a motion to adjourn. Okay. Councillor Klassen, seconder. Councillor Montague. All in favor?
Yay.
Okay, and that carries. Thank you. This meeting's adjourned.